right, we got some people in attendance here. I hope everybody can see my screen. Um, just want to let
10-4.
everybody know who we are. We're the Chicago Archaeological Society. We're happy that you could all join us today. Um, we have been around for maybe 100 years. It's hard to know, but I have heard stories going back that far about meeting in the 1920s, the 1940s, and the 1960s. As early as the 1962, a code of ethics was adopted by the Chicago Archaeological Society. Um, we are not just the only group in Illinois that has meetings and discusses archaeology of Illinois. We are one of several chapters in the state of Illinois. We all belong to the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology. Um, now, their mission is to have greater understanding of Illinois, which Illinois archaeology and history, which we do also, but we do broaden our mission to include the whole world. We want to better understand the story of all mankind. So we host these meetings regularly for those that maybe haven't attended before. So we bring in some great speakers from the different universities and museums. Um, and we really depend on your support. This is the time of year where people renew, and we would like for you to either renew your membership or join and become a member. On our website here at the ChicagoArchaeologicalSociety.com, you can go to join and donate. Now here you can fill out a form and mail us a check like people have been doing for many years, or you can also actually join through the website. You can click on here and pay through the website, so you don't have to send a check, and it's more fast and easy to do, right? So we have different kinds of membership levels. We have individual, we have family, we have student, we have underwriter and benefactor. So please, we depend on the support for people like you. All right. So today I want to introduce our speaker. Let me stop sharing my screen here. All right. So our speaker today is Grace Conrad, PhD candidate at The Ohio State University. She's an archaeologist specializing in the Ohio River Valley, a Kent State University 2023 graduate. Conrad's current research focuses on the human interaction with space, specifically how people shape their environments and how their environments shape them. She has spent the last 3 years excavating and working with material at the Turpin site at Fort Ancient Village, located just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. Please welcome Grace Conrad. All right,
Thank you
Grace, you
very
are
much.
muted.
Awesome. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you very much for that introduction, Ray. I will go ahead and share my screen now. Hopefully we can get it looking the way we did earlier. How does that look?
Looks great.
Wonderful. So I am once again Grace Conrad, currently at The Ohio State University. And today I would like to speak with all of you about some research I've been working on. And the title of today's talk is What's the Point? Contextualizing the Significance of the Turpin Lithic Assemblage. So, this is some work that I've done in collaboration with my advisor, Dr. Robert Cook, and an awesome undergraduate volunteer named Kylie Barkley. So before we get into the topic of today's discussion, I think it's always really important to understand why researchers are interested in the topics that they are. As the discipline of archaeology moves forward, a lot of us are recognizing the importance of acknowledging and addressing our own positionalities as they relate to the work. So I would like to run through that real quick with you all. So I'm an Ohio native, born and raised in Northeast Ohio, and I've kind of always been interested in history and culture, but that was really solidified for me in fourth grade, which under Ohio State curriculum, fourth graders in social studies learn all about Ohio history. So I was completely enthralled. And, looking back on it, kind of surprised how ignorant I was to Ohio's indigenous pasts. So I was really lucky to have a family that supported these interests. And from a young age, as you can see that photo of me on the left, that's from a trip that summer following that class that really shifted my worldview. We visited a group of earthworks in Chillicothe, Ohio. That's Southern Ohio. And I was just having a blast. I was able to see in real life and apply the knowledge that I had learned through that class. And that was really exciting for me. However, I was really surprised that the adults in my family who went on this trip with me really didn't know a lot about this history. That surprised me. You guys are the grown-ups. Why don't you know about the history of where we live? And from then on, I kind of continued to see that in Ohio and the Midwest as a broader region, people are severely uninformed about the native histories and use of land that has gone on there. So that's kind of the driving passion for me and my work and my research today. But I also wanted to touch on a huge part of my training and development of interest in archaeology, which was my membership in a group very similar to you all's. I got started with Firelands Archaeology, which is also a nonprofit geared towards getting local community members in North Central Ohio who are, amateur or avocational archaeologists, professionally trained archaeologists, or just interested community members involved in local archaeology. So I was really lucky to get involved at an early age. I started when I was 15, and we had a very close partnership with the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. The curator of archaeology there, the recently retired Dr. Brian Redmond, um, used to let us join in on his field schools, and that's how I first got my hand in the dirt. So I have some images there of members of that group that were really influential on my journey to pursuing archaeology as a career. They're the ones who trained me on my field methods, even though, none of them were professionally trained as archaeologists. So I really owe a lot of my journey to members of groups like this one. So I'm very honored to be here today to speak with you all. So moving on to our talk about the Turpin lithic assemblage. A prior iteration of this presentation had a title about the transition from Hopewell to Fort Ancient, so that's a big part of what we'll be talking about today. Um, you still see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yes, looking good.
Okay, perfect, thanks. All right, so a long-standing point of contention in the broader Midwest, but specifically Ohio and the Ohio River Valley, has been the degree of continuity and change between the Middle Woodland and Fort Ancient periods. So, as you can see on this timeline that I stole from the National Park Service, the Middle Woodland time period, which we ascribe to the Hopewell culture, dates from about 200 BC to AD 500, give or take a couple years. And then Fort Ancient time period is more of that late prehistoric on the second part of that timeline. So from about 1000, AD 1000 to 1750. So between these two periods, we have the intermediate late woodland period, which dates from about AD 400 to 1000. So right in between those other two. And this intermediary period has become a placeholder, but is clearly of great interest as it was a time during which peoples living in this region transitioned into corn farming villages. So kind of haven't spent a lot of time exploring what exactly the late woodland period is. It's just that time between the Hopewell and beginning of the Fort Ancient. So in this project, my collaborators and I address this issue of the late woodland by focusing on diagnostic projectile points from a legacy collection from the Middle Woodland Turner site and the late woodland Fort Ancient Turpin Homestead site. Both of those collections are housed at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard University. The assemblage is relatively large, but unfortunately, given the poor quality of the expedition, most of the points and other artifacts are without intrasite provenience. So we have all of the objects, we know about when they were collected, from what sites, but within that site, we don't really have an understanding of where they were pulled from. So to combat this, we have been revisiting the site to more carefully excavate many different areas so that we can more accurately examine the significance of this important transitional period. You know, a lot changes culturally, socially, biologically when people adopt agriculture. So it's really interesting to explore that transition to agriculture. So, a bit of background on those Harvard expeditions. Harvard University was the first to professionally excavate the Turner and Turpin homestead sites and did so in the late 1880s. Both of these sites are in Hamilton County, which is the same county as Cincinnati. So, we're in southwestern Ohio. Frederick Putnam, who is sometimes referred to as the father of American archaeology, was associated with Harvard. He was basically brought on by the Peabody to fill their museum with cool stuff that would want to be displayed. So he spent a lot of time traveling around the United States, spending a decent time in the Midwest and Ohio specifically. Kind of doing basically a systematic looting of different sites to collect objects that would look cool to display in the museum or to take to the Columbian Exposition. So he was that first professional archaeologist in the region. And he hired a local physician, Charles Metz, in Cincinnati to lead the field projects of sites in that area. So in this talk, we'll be looking at two sites specifically, the Turner site, which is pictured on the top of this slide, and the Turpin Homestead site, which is on the bottom. The records for Turner are decent in terms of contextualizing the excavation. However, this is not the case at Turpin Homestead, where we do not often know where these archaeologists' excavations were located, other than the fact that they sometimes simply indicated whether they were either east or west of the original Turpin farmhouse. Some of their notes will say, you know, we found this thing 50 strides east of that tree, which, you know, almost over 100 years later, that tree no longer exists. So we don't really have good spatial context for the Turpin site. And I should mention that the Turner site, once again, is a middle woodland site. You can see it has a lot of earthworks and enclosures. And then the Turpin site is more associated with that late woodland transitional period into Fort Ancient. So in the Harvard projectile point collection for both of these sites, only 30, which equates to 26%, contained at least east or west of the farmhouse provenience information. So for only 26% of that collection, we know that like very basic amount of spatial data. And then for those with east and west information, only 15 had more specific spatial data. So we aren't really working with a lot here. In short, very few artifacts can be tied to specific feature contexts, so they've lost a lot of that important information. And over the last few years, as I mentioned, our team has been reinvestigating at least the Turpin site with the aim to contextualize and better understand this legacy collection housed at Harvard. An important note is that the Turner site unfortunately no longer exists. It was completely excavated, torn up, and is now a gravel pit. So we can't go back and do any more work there. We have to just kind of work with what we've got in those existing collections. Luckily, though, the Turpin Homestead site is owned by the township within which it's situated and is currently designated as a green space. So it's owned by the township, and there are a lot of rules about what people can and cannot do on this site. So it has a much higher degree of preservation. So I mentioned we are using diagnostic projectile points to kind of tease out what the late woodland might look like at these two sites. So here I have a selection of what are called low cluster points. This is a type of point designated by justice in this book. I use this thing all the time. It's a really interesting book. I don't think it's in print anymore, but if you can get your hands on it, even from a library, it's really awesome, especially as people interested in Midwestern archaeology. A great way to identify point types. So once again, these are low points. You can see the top row are points from the Turner site, the bottom from Turpin. These are all points from the collections housed at the Peabody Museum. Uh, we went through and tried to identify as many as we could, and this is just a selection of those low clusters. So you can see a lot of these have that flared base. They don't often have too significant of notching. Sometimes they do. Um, there's a range of them, but this is what they look like for the most part. So using all of these points, taking photographs of them, taking different measurements, we understood that Harvard's collection reveals a clear overlap between Turner and Turpin Homestead in terms of transitional middle woodland and late woodland point styles. I forgot to mention on the last slide that these low points are characteristic of the late woodland period, which is why we are finding that at both Turner, a middle woodland site, and Turpin, a Fort Ancient site. So that's why we chose to focus on low, because it is mostly associated with the late woodland. So once again, we see a clear overlap between those transitional points. If you look at this plot here, the red bars represent points from the Turner site, while the gray bars are those from Turpin Homestead. And we did just a simple count and turn that into percentages of points from that collection, uh, designating the points as either early woodland, middle woodland, that transitional middle woodland, late woodland, or simply late woodland points. We didn't include Fort Ancient points because that was much later than what we were interested in looking at for this project. And once again, as you can see, the most overlap very obviously is at that middle woodland, late woodland transition. And this is consistent with radiocarbon dates that overlap from about AD 400 to 500 at both sites, and supports the conclusion that there is more continuity during the woodland period for these sites than was previously known. The most common of these transitional points, once again, are the low cluster points that we saw on the last slide. While we do not have much provenience data from Harvard's Turpin homestead excavation, there are two findings worth noting. The first regards the overwhelming similarity when comparing the East and West in terms of diagnostic projectile points. The pattern is very clear on the bar graph on the last slide. If I want to go back there. Oh, it's not letting me go back. Anyways, the second finding regards specific feature contexts associated with the very few that were recorded. And the most important finding is that the Fort Ancient and Woodland temporal diagnostics do not only reflect vertical stratigraphy, meaning we don't only see the older woodland points deeper and those later, more recent in time Fort Ancient points up higher, as there's clear mixture of both of these temporal diagnostics within village and mortuary patterns, even within several burials. So that's what you see here on this slide. These are just some like digitized graphics of features, houses, burials, potential mortuary houses at the Turpin homestead site. So these two clusters on the left are patterns to the west of the homestead, and the one on the right, as you can see, is directly east of the homestead. And the W and FA represent projectile points that are either associated with woodland time periods or the Fort Ancient time period. And as you can see, there are some burials that have either woodland or Fort Ancient. For example, this cluster on the far left has one burial with a Fort Ancient point, one with a woodland point. But when we look in this center pattern, the way this copied over to PowerPoint made it a little less obvious, but that W on top of the FA, those both are within that single burial. And we see that in one burial on that right cluster as well. So we can draw the conclusion from that that people were still using both those woodland style diagnostic points as well as the Fort Ancient diagnostic points at the same time. Or perhaps people had a woodland point that was maybe passed down through generations to them, or they found somewhere close by and meant a lot to them, and they were buried with that. Regardless of the situation, it once again demonstrates that there's a higher degree of continuity between these two time periods in this area than we previously thought. So I mentioned that we have been revisiting the Turpin homestead site and re-excavating based on our knowledge gained from that legacy collection at Harvard. So this slide demonstrates some of what we've been finding over the past couple field seasons. While the Turner site cannot be re-excavated, as I said, because it became a gravel quarry in the early 1900s, the Turpin Homestead site has been preserved by Anderson Township as a green space, and they have graciously allowed us to come and work at the site. So our field focus has mainly been here at Turpin on small excavations throughout the site. We run a field school here for undergraduate students where they get to train on field methods, and it helps us further our research. So through this work, we are starting to better understand the spatial relationships of the diagnostic points at Turpin. And as we learn more, we hope that this will help us better understand the temporal relationships between three small villages at Turpin. So here you can see these kind of resemble those clusters from the last slide. The yellow circles represent what we believe to be three separate village occupations at the site, with the earliest being the most west, so that left-hand circle, getting earlier or more recent in time as we go east. So all of the points you see on the screen are from our more recent excavations. These are not points from Harvard, and each of them are drawn with that red line to their associated feature. So I point your attention to that center circle once again. We see 3 points up top. We have a Jack's Reef pentagonal, which is a classic woodland point, a pretty crude but likely low cluster point. Once again, transitional mid to late woodland. And then a classic Fort Ancient triangle point on the right. And those all came from a single structure, likely. So once again, suggesting some sense of continuity between these time periods, even within a single site. You see similar patterns on the right, more triangles, as well as more woodland points. So we're really excited to continue our work there to see not only with projectile points, but diagnostic ceramics and more radiocarbon dates, what more we can learn about this really interesting and understudied transitional period that is the late woodland. So part of this, which I'm really excited about because this is directly related to my emerging dissertation research, is focused at a nearby site called Peach Orchard. So this is another site that those early archaeologists, Frederick Putnam and the local physician Charles Metz, excavated way back in the 1880s. We see lots of notes and maps drawn from this site in their collection, and they also have an extensive collection of objects from this site. The only problem was we had no idea where it was. We knew it had to be close by within the same town that we were working at in Turpin. And through a lot of wild goose chasing, about a year ago, maybe two now, we were able to relocate the Peach Orchard site. That's a story for another time. But now that means we can once again, through the guidance of this existing legacy collection, continue new work at the site to provide greater context. So Peach Orchard is really interesting. It's actually right across the street from Turpin. It was right there the whole time. It's a hilltop site, so there's a very prominent hill on the landform, and there is at the very top of the hill a very small area. It's not large, that is currently owned by a private landowner. They live there. Um, but in the collection at Harvard, we found some really interesting patterns. There were dozens of chunky stones, which you can see a picture of from on the left. These are game pieces. If any of you have ever played bocce, it's very similar to that. We have ethnographic accounts of modern Native Americans playing this game. The way it worked is these chunky stones, which are usually grooved on both sides, would have been rolled, and then players of the game would have spears. They would try and throw their spear where they thought the chunky stone would fall, and whoever spear was closest to where the stone actually fell won. It actually sounds pretty fun. I want to play chunky sometime. But we see dozens of them at the top of this hill. And like I said, the landform is quite small. I don't know if you could have even played one round of chunky up there, let alone have multiple games going on. So there's something interesting going on there with that. And then to the right, I created this image of a selection of projectile points from that site that Harvard collected. And I've arranged them from the oldest type to the newest. And we see quite a range there, all the way from early woodland to Fort Ancient Triangle. So it appears that there was a sustained occupation or use of this site. But we really were just going based off of Harvard's very crude and old notes and maps and these few objects that they've collected from there. So it's really exciting now that we have relocated the site to look at that further and see how that connects to this larger understanding of the transition from woodland to Fort Ancient. So, what we have done so far is some preliminary survey work. We had a magnetometry survey done so we could see some areas of low and high magnetism, which helps us identify potential features. And it looks like there might be two giant earth ovens up there, possibly a few structures, maybe even an earthwork. So we have quite a few areas that we can target and explore. We also conducted this past summer a shovel test survey where we did, I think, 22 shovel tests that were 50 by 50 centimeter squares, and we found a lot of interesting stuff. Actually, this past Friday, I finally finished cleaning and organizing, counting and sorting all of the material. And there was a lot of stuff up there. It's an incredibly dense site. Um, Saw a lot of board ancient triangles, which was to be expected, but also a lot of transitional points and even early woodland points. So we're really itching to get out there this summer to open up some full units, hopefully get some radiocarbon dates, and once again see how this piece of the puzzle, we love archaeology puns, fits into once again figuring out what the late woodland is. So leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger. I would love to keep in touch if you have any interest in this story. I am reachable via email, which you can see there. We also have an Instagram page for our fieldwork. It's at mvrr.project. Um, we are trying to be more consistent on there. Definitely will be during the field season. But that's the host for the larger project within which this research fits in. It's called Miami Valley Recollections and Reconnections. So it's where we post about all of the fieldwork and updates and analyses that we find from our work at both Turpin and Peach Orchard. So with that, I open up to any questions. I'll keep my screen sharing in case anybody has any questions that they would like to reference uh, any of the slides.
Thank you for a great presentation, Grace. At this point, if you would like to take yourself off of mute, you can, or if you'd like to add your question to the chat, I'd be glad to read it for you. If you would like to speak, just use the hand raising feature so I can go in some sort of order. And just a reminder to everybody that this is the time of year where we ask you to renew your membership. So please do go to chicagoarchaeologicalsociety.org, and the information is there about renewing your membership. We really depend on it. Little plug.
Ray, there's one question in the Q&A.
Oh, there is? Okay, great. All right, from Bill Green asks, what point types were made between the low points and the Fort Ancient triangles in the Illinois and Mississippi valleys? Small side notched arrow points fill in the time period between AD 600 and 900. Did you find these in the Turpin assemblage?
Okay, thank you for your question, Bill. That's interesting. There are definitely a few types that we see within that time period. And of course, these like time periods with points are kind of fuzzy. But something that we do see, I'll pull it up on my slides here, are where is it at? Over here is the one I want. Scalorn points. The point, the second from the right is Scalorn. This one's kind of broken and it's super burned, but you can kind of see that side notch there. They're very tiny, but we do see a lot of those at both Turpin and Peach Orchard. I forget how many we have at Peach Orchard, but it is the overwhelming majority. We have even more of those than the Fort Ancient Triangle points. So yeah, we're definitely trying to tease out what those mean exactly. But yeah, Scalorn, we definitely see at those sites.
And then I see Anne asks, are there structures that fit with each time period?
So I guess some clarification on your question, Anne. Do you mean with Middle Woodland and Fort Ancient or um, like Late Woodland and Fort Ancient?
I guess I mean within Woodland and Fort Ancient, but basically any changes in structure type through time.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely see a change with structure, and that's one of the things that shifts with the adoption of agriculture. Towards the beginning of my talk, I mentioned how once people started growing corn, a lot in their lives changed, both socially, culturally, biologically. Um, and if you think about it, if you are adopting farming as opposed to hunting and gathering. It requires you to be much more sedentary if you're going to tend a field of maize. So we see much more permanent structures in the Fort Ancient time period. Um, Most of them are referred to as wall trench homes. They're actually pretty cool. They consist of some ditches. They're mostly squares. So they'll dig four ditches and then they lay prefabricated walls into those. So they would have posts that they would tie together with different material and then set those walls into the ditches that were excavated prior. And that's a much more permanent house than the small um, little hamlet households that we see in the earlier woodland times.
I've worked with some of that in Illinois and those changes. And then a tangential question is that maybe not part of your research, but are you finding corn residues and remains that can be analyzed and try to make some association on where the corn was coming from into the Ohio area?
Um, I can answer part of your question more confidently than the other. But yes, we have a lot of evidence of corn at the Turpin Homestead site. We actually have the earliest dated corn cob in the Ohio River Valley region, which is very interesting. It's definitely one of the earliest Fort Ancient villages in the region. And we do get a lot of carbonized corn there. I'm not sure if there has been any work done on tracing where that corn came from, but it's widely, maybe not widely understood, but widely thought and is a thread that many of us have going through our research. Just that the people living in this region associated with this culture we call Fort Ancient are likely migrants from the Mississippi Valley and Mississippians, even from Cahokia. I know my advisor, not with corn, but has done some analyses related to migration, some strontium analysis done on teeth from burials at the site. with permission of our descendant community collaborators, and found that there were individuals who were interred at the Turpin site that came from that greater Cahokia region. So it's likely it did come from there.
Right. I started my archaeology at Cahokia, so have some.
Oh, very
Anyway,
cool.
move on to others.
We have a question from James. Any evidence of animal use at the site?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I guess I should ask what you mean by animal use. Do you mean like domestication, or just exploitation of animals?
Uh, any and or all.
Gotcha. Yes, I see so much animal bone. That is most of the time the overwhelming majority of um, material that we recover. We see lots of evidence of burning, cut marks. People were definitely snacking on all types of animals living in this area. So we see a lot of deer, turkey, a lot of fish because it's the Turpin homestead site is situated on a terrace that sits right above the Little Miami River floodplain. So people were definitely utilizing the water and animals that lived in it there. Um, we also have an interesting dog burial at Turpin. That was found before I joined the project, but there was what appeared to be a very intentionally buried dog, or very intentionally buried dog at the site, which indicates that there was probably some type of relationship between the people living there as well as that dog. Um, Along that line, too, we often find in our trash deposits bones that will have canine bite marks on them. So probably just, toss in the dog your leftover deer leg, and he gnawed on it like we do with our dogs today. So I don't know if there's been much work done at Turpin specifically about domestication and relationships with animals like dogs in that way, but we definitely have some things that suggest there was a relationship there.
Cool. Thank you.
Of course.
Any additional
I
questions?
got a couple of questions. If I could just ask them out loud instead of typing them.
Sounds good.
Thank you for today's presentation. It's good to see the rebirth of legacy collections, especially using them in archaeological context. So I think that's the methodological improvement of your thesis. And I there's a lot of work in Illinois that's been doing that for some time. So I'm glad to see that. I guess I've got three things for you. First one, what is your relationship with descendant communities? You work, I would assume, with the Shawnee, other groups. How do you what in Illinois it's becoming increasingly more important, obviously, consultation. So what are you doing for your project to include, indigenous voices in your research?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. As I finished giving my presentation, I wish I had had a slide on that because, as you mentioned, it's very important. And like you touched on too, the use of legacy collections. Archaeology has a pretty ugly colonial history in America, and it really is our duty as modern archaeologists to, I think, try and just improve based on that, which is why I really wanted to construct a project that did make use of a legacy collection. Don't want to just go out and start digging for the heck of it, How can we provide context and learn from things that have already been removed from the ground? And a big part of that is forming and fostering relationships with living descendants. So, with that greater project, MVRR, the co-PI of that project is Rebecca Hawkins. She works with the Miami Nation of Oklahoma. They're definitely our closest collaborators. So every step of the way, we are in consultation with her, and she works with the Greater Tribal Council just on our research questions, our methodology, protocols if we encounter ancestors, um, any and all of the above. This past summer, we had, I think, second councilman of the nation come out and visit. We've had the TIPO come out. So we really prioritize those relationships um, in both, like I said, the construction and formulation of our research questions and our research plans, but also in the interpretation of what we find. And that's a big part of what my dissertation is going to be. I have that like traditional archaeological part of it where we're going to be excavating at Peach Orchard, but the second half of it, I want to be a more ethnographic component where we're engaging with living descendants and local community members about their interpretations and perspectives of the land. So, to answer your question in short, we try and get them involved as much as they'd like to be.
Outstanding. Yes, we in Illinois with our main Illinois State Archaeological Survey, we work with 33 different groups, and at times that's the most important move forward. So it's good to hear the protocol in Ohio is quite similar, and we're basically, as my advisor would say, we're paying the sins of our ancestors. And I'm glad to see you on the front line considering that. My second thing was going to be what I see in just this report is something we work on too. You have a really persistent place. This is a concept that's used all throughout archaeology, not just in Illinois or the US. So what I really see is a persistent place that these folks throughout both woodland, and I really think you have almost a Mississippian component, because for us, those triangulars, we call those Madison points, those sit all the way the woodland. I mean, and they're even used into the historic period when folks start switching and cutting pots and making metal triangular points like that. So when I see those points, we know, at least in Illinois, that they can represent anything from late woodland all the way into the historic. And the thing that got me the most interesting bit is seeing a Chucky stone so early on. For us, that's I mean, that's typical wood Mississippian, high-end chiefdom when games are bringing different fractions together, and to see so many of them, that's quite interesting. And now I'm wondering, did Chucky stones and that game radiate out of this Hopewellian sphere and then Fort Ancient sphere, and it then got there. So I think that, to me, that's a pretty cool place. So with that rant, the question's going to be, have you looked into this idea of more of a persistent place, and perhaps these bits represent people liking that landscape and using it for multiple generations?
Absolutely. And that's what got me most interested in this project, is that continuity in place. I mean, we have the heartland of the Hopewell culture in the central southwestern Ohio, where clearly like place is very much anchored there, right? And then we see sort of the fall off of this huge ceremonialism. Um, but what I think is really interesting as we investigate the late woodland more is we see a lot of continuity at place specifically. There's a lot of interesting analogs throughout the region that I'm looking at currently. So in Anderson Township, we have Turpin, and then just up the hill, we have Peach Orchard, which it appears there's definitely some kind of woodland component to be determined the extent of that. But elsewhere in the region, we see similar sorts of patterns. We have Sunwatch, very well known Fort Ancient village site, and not too far away on a slightly elevated landform is a middle woodland cemetery site. We have the Oberting Fort Ancient site in southeastern Indiana, and there is a hill at the fork of the Ohio and Miami rivers, where there is a site that's called Shawnee Lookout, and that has a middle woodland earthwork there. So throughout the region, it appears that there is, how did you say it? Persistent place. I really
Persistent
like that
places,
term.
yeah.
Yeah. And what I think is really interesting, and I hope to understand, is how those places were reused even, after the drop off of this grand ceremonialism we see in the Hopewell. And I think it would be interesting to explore your idea about chunky and how that spread. We've only found one chunky stone at Peach Orchard so far in our work, and that was on the surface, so we didn't have any greater context for that. But I'll be interested to see this summer once we open up some full units if we find any, and if we can get dates for those. But yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought of where that originated and how that spread through the region.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I'm going to be doing the write up for your chat. So I'm just trying to get a lot of details. And while just take a thing, can you go back to your introduction slide, the first slide, and just smile at the screen so I can take a screenshot?
Absolutely.
Sorry to make my work a lot easier.
No, I love it.
It's a little stalkerish. All right, let's just do 3, 2. Perfect. Thank you.
Of course.
Great. That's great. Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Thank you for your questions.
And with your ongoing work, maybe sometime in the fall, you could send us a slight update that we could put in our newsletter on what is, 2 or 3 significant things that come out of your peach orchard work this summer.
Absolutely. And I will say, I've submitted an abstract for a talk at this year's SAA annual meeting in Denver. So between now and April, I'll be analyzing those preliminary data from the objects we gathered during our shovel testing. But yeah, after this summer, I can also definitely give you an update. And a good place to see that too would be on our Instagram, to keep up there. And I see a question in the chat, the dreaded question. Here is how I choose to answer this question. The dreaded question, what's your ETA on your dissertation? I have a total of 5 years of funding, which gives me 2.5 more years. So hopefully it will be done in 2.5, but maybe 3. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Sorry, it just needed to be asked. Yeah.
No, it's okay. Fair question.
See, that's the thing. He just got his, so now he's taking it out on everyone else that's around. And we tried to do so hard not to diffuse that hate, James. So you did not do it, James. I can't believe you.
No, hey, I got mine. How does anyone else want to deal with theirs? That's all individual. Yes, use every second of your funding you have, and yeah, yeah. But it sounds good. It's really more of just how, the point of asking that was how developed are these thoughts? How much more time are you going to have to either A, develop thoughts, dig more, get more data, combine stuff, or is this already sort of coalescing into a final kind of form? And is it gonna be, like well, as I said, like in this form? So yeah, just a curious question.
Yeah, and to now that you asked that like more in depth, I can give you a better answer, I feel. Thankfully, Ohio State has restructured their dissertation requirements, so they're not requiring that everyone just write a single manuscript. They're giving us the option of writing 3 journal articles, which is the option I will be taking because that sounds quicker, but also better suited for my project. So the plan is for the next 2 summers to excavate at Peach Orchard, hopefully open 4 2x2 meter units. We have an awesome group of undergrad students who are interested in our field school. And then also staying to help me wash and analyze artifacts. And then after that, after we have analyzed all of the material we've recovered, then I'll be able to get into my more ethnographic part of the dissertation where I can present the findings and interpretations to the various stakeholders and get their feedback there. So that's kind of the rough timeline.
Yeah, I did mine through publication as well.
Okay, awesome.
It was I would say it's easier in a way, but it's much longer, obviously, to go through that peer review process,
Mhm.
and so it doesn't take that much time. It takes the same amount of time, but I think that it's a better way to go, because instead of you writing the manuscript and then having to go back to make articles from it, you've already made your articles and you're ahead of the game. But try to get the highest tier, highest metric articles that you can, because that will serve you going forward. But looks good. Looks like you got it in there, and it's good to see your sort of multi-site approach as well. That will look good to your advisors and markers. So it just I would like to see some more educational outreach too to the community. So it's good that you have the more academic line of field schools, but how are we including the scouts and historical societies? What is their input on there, if any?
Yeah, we are super involved with them. We are so lucky that the community is just so interested and ready to engage because a lot of people who live there have lived there for a long time. Their families have lived there. So the local community is also very connected to this landscape, which I think just adds layers to this project of connections to land. So we work very closely with the Historical Society. They actually provide us with places to stay and bring us snacks out in the field. But we always try to do at least 1 or 2 presentations to the Historical Society, and they market to the larger community. So we've also had some members of local government come and hear us talk and want to get involved. One of my students who will be working with me in the field this summer is a lifelong resident of this town. We offer volunteer opportunities. So if anybody in the community or elsewhere wants to come help at site, we let them operate the screens for us. We're also fortunate to be just a very public facing site based on where we're situated. There's a heavily used bike path just off the site. So people walking, biking by can see that we're out there. And we usually have a poster set out. Sometimes we have someone just stationed there at the front of the site to answer any questions, entice people to come look. We're very passionate about being a very public facing project. We love local community members to come in and get educated and get involved in any way that they'd like. We also are trying to get funding to sponsor any interested students who are members of descendant communities. The Miami University of Ohio has the Miami Center, where a lot of Miami Nation students are supported. So we're currently trying to organize a way to get any interested students involved through that center as well.
Outstanding. Well, if you could give us any dates and times that you're looking for volunteers, we can forward that info. And I'm sure some folks wouldn't mind taking a drive out to Ohio for a weekend and being a dirt junkie. So if you can give us any of that info, that would be great.
Absolutely. We welcome it. We'll be out there the entire month of June. So I can definitely forward specific dates and locations. So if anyone's interested, we'd love to have you.
Great.
with you being that close to the bike path, have you had any trouble with vandalism at the site? And
Yeah, that is an unfortunate part about the visibility and history of this site. People have always known that this was a site. Let me pull up a picture from my slideshow. So the Turpin Homestead site, which you can see on the bottom right of this picture, that's the historic home, and you can see the mound in front of it. There's no longer any earthworks at this site, but at one point there were. So since, European settlers came to this region, it was known that this area had an archaeological record. So throughout time, people have unfortunately looted the site. Both professional archaeologists, if we want to call it looting, which I think in some cases is fair, as well as, just community members. I even had someone my first year out there come up to me and say that he likes to come to the site since it's a public green space. Any community member is allowed to access it. Come to the site and dig through our backfill piles to see if he can find anything we missed. And it's takes a lot of tact to I guess respect people's interest in the archaeology, but to also try to educate them on, why we don't take objects for ourselves. So it's hard to gauge the degree of looting anymore. We're currently in the process of getting some like trail cams to monitor. But there are local community members who have volunteered and said, that they kind of keep an eye out on things for us, which is nice for us and for them because, that is their local heritage as well.
Well, this has been fascinating. Any further questions? Well, thank you for coming out, and we look forward to more information.
Yes, thank you once again for having me. I'm very passionate about groups like this, so it was truly an honor to come speak with you all. Like I said, I can send those dates. I'll also share my email, so if anybody has questions about anything, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Awesome.
Well done, Grace.
Thank you all.
And I just want to remind everybody to come back next month. In the chat, I put our website where you can go and renew your membership or join. I also put a link for our next meeting. So we're going to have Alan Kolota from the University of Chicago speak about the Amara people of Tiwanaku. And for those that are not familiar, the Amara people still exist today. They didn't go anywhere. And they live around Lake Titicaca, and they make their own islands. So they live on man-made islands. From what I understand, when people get married, they chop off a bit of the island, and the newlyweds get their own little piece of land or raft, whatever you want to call it. So I'm really looking forward to our next meeting. Hope to see you all there. Any further comments or announcements?
Ray, this I put in our YouTube page that's
Oh yeah,
up
please.
there. So if anyone is interested, we'll have this chat up there ASAP. So if you want to go back and review or and get more information, we kindly ask for you to subscribe so we can keep building our networks and share amongst your friends. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you take a look at the chat, we have our YouTube page on there. Please subscribe. You'll be able to rewatch today's talk and many other talks. Also, to Grace put her email in the chat if you would like to contact her. Please do. All right. Any further announcements before we adjourn the meeting? Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next month.